Guess they won.
They do it anyway, right?
Okay, so I'll just plow ahead here in using my infallibility.
We trust your infallibility.
Because I'm just talking about real infallibility. I don't have one. Okay, so careful things is to know what it is when the church is teaching something and what somebody inside the church is telling their opinion, which isn't something I'm sure you can grasp right off the bat, but with a little work you can. Know that the church cannot earn what she teaches officially in the area of faith and morals as part of the Catholic faith. And that the Pope is infallible in quotes, but meaning that he possesses the ability to speak infallibly under certain circumstances. Catholic doctrine. Cardinal Gaspari sums up the Catholic position in his catechism as follows. Cardinal Gaspari was an old guy who wore a red hat. And besides that, he wrote something that was like the Catechism of the Catholic Church. It was kind of almost the precursor of the Baltimore Catechism. Like the precursor of the Baltimore Catechism. We have the Catechism of the Council of Trent. Cardinal Gaspari made a more concise catechism, and then they kind of made the Baltimore Catechism kind of based also on the Catechism of the Council of Trent. Cardinal Gaspari's catechism was more for adults, I think. And he says in his catechism, which is called the Catholic Catechism, Catechism Catholicus, he says, the Church is infallible in her office of teaching, owing to the perpetual assistance of the Holy Ghost promised to her by Christ, when either in the exercise of her ordinary and universal governance, or by a solemn pronouncement of the supreme authority, she proposes for the acceptance of all truths of faith or morals that are either revealed in themselves or connected with revelation. To pronounce a solemn judgment of this kind is the peculiar function of the Roman Pontiff and of the bishops together with the Roman Pontiff, especially when assembled in an ecumenical council. An ecumenical council, what is an ecumenical council? An ecumenical or general council is an assembly of the bishops of the entire Catholic Church called together by the Roman Pontiff. Over such an assembly, he himself presides, either personally or by his legates, and it belongs to him authoritatively to confirm the decrees of such a council. The Roman Pontiff exercises his prerogative of personal infallibility when he speaks ex cathedra, that is, when in the exercise of his office as shepherd and teacher of all Christians, he defines a doctrine concerning faith or morals to be held by the whole church. Ex cathedra, we talked about that before, means out from the chair, meaning out from the chair or the seat of St. Peter. We are bound to believe with divine and Catholic faith truths concerning faith or morals that the Church proposes for acceptance by all the faithful, whether by her ordinary and universal authority or by some solemn pronouncement. A truth thus defined is called a dogma of the faith. Denial of it is called heresy. Okay, so a couple things I want to say about that. An ecumenical council. And why do I want to say something about that? Because the word ecumenical now means something entirely different than what it's supposed to mean. Now when we say, oh, we're having an ecumenical event, right? We're having this ecumenical event at Assisi, for example. It means that people from all kinds of different sects and cults and confessions and things like that are invited to all get together and sing, I'm okay, you're okay, basically. that is not what ecumenical means. The word ecumenical comes from a Greek word, ekumenos, which means housekeeping, basically. And what an ecumenical council was called for was literally for the church to get its housekeeping done, to do its business. That's what an ecumenical council was for. It has nothing to do with any other faith or confession or sect or cult or anything. That's not what the word means. So, the ecumenical councils are generally also what they call dogmatic councils, generally. Meaning that an ecumenical council, in most of the history of the church, was only called to deal with some kind of question or problem that had arisen. And that's from the very first one, the Council of Jerusalem, that was called by the apostles, original apostles, down to the First Vatican Council. All of those are not only ecumenical, but also dogmatic councils, where the greatest council in the history of the church arguably would be the Council of Trent. And that was in response to Protestantism. So all of a sudden, after 1,500 and something years, we have these people, and they're starting to teach something that is the opposite of what the Christian church has taught for 1,500 years. And in some of that, a lot of the teaching had just been understood to be what it was in the church. So in many cases, people hadn't sat down and defined all the particulars to do with the 7 sacraments, for example. Okay? We've always treated baptism as for example, one of the 7 sacraments given to us, established by Christ while he was on earth, and because of the nature of baptism, it is necessary for salvation, yada, 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 yada. But there are little details of it too. Applying Greek philosophy, there are different parts to a sacrament. The matter and the form of the sacrament. The matter is what makes up the sacrament. The form are the words that accompany the administration of the sacrament. Who can administer the sacraments? All these things. These had been always understood by the church, and the church never felt any particular reason to have a solemn proclamation on each and every one of those details until the Protestant revolt of the 16th century. And then all of a sudden it says, well, it would be good for us and for the faithful to solemnly define all the details about the 7 sacraments. In fact, even the number of sacraments to 7, for example, and defining them as things that were established by Christ himself, all 7 of them. So that's what we got in the Council of Trent. Now, the last dogmatic ecumenical council was the First Vatican Council. And that was dealing with issues of infallibility and the papacy and things like that. And it did make several definitions along those lines, but because of the war in Italy, it was adjourned, but never dismissed. So really, we need a Vatican II to finish Vatican I, but instead we got a Vatican II that was entirely something else. Now, I'm mentioning all this because Vatican II, which is not mentioned in polite circles, but I have to, it was the first council called by a pope with no necessity whatsoever. There was no particular threat to the church. There was nothing that had to be defined. And in fact, when he consulted with the cardinals and bishops in the Curia, John the 23rd, he says, well, I'm thinking of calling an ecumenical council. What do you think? They pretty much all said, no, don't do it. And in fact, one of them, Cardinal Taviani, said to him, who was his personal theologian, he said to call an ecumenical council without some threat or something, threatening the church would be to tempt God himself. John the 23rd's response was, well, I don't care, I'm calling one anyway. And so he did, and all the bishops got together in Rome, but it was the very first council of the church that was not a dogmatic council. There is nothing in Vatican II, except what was quoted from previous councils, that you have to believe at all. It was what they call a pastoral council. And even as a pastoral council, it was a huge failure, a huge disaster for the church. Probably because the Pope didn't take the recommendation seriously not to call it, because you'd be tempting God in the process. So what they did was they tempted God by calling this meeting of the bishops of the church with no visible reason and no external threat to the church, and nothing really to do. They had to bother themselves trying to find something to do at this council. And it would have been all right, actually. There was an archbishop who was put in charge of writing what they called the schema for Vatican II. And these were going to be various things, dogmatic statements about the Blessed Virgin Mary, about the nature of the church, and whatnot. And the schema is the program that they follow at an ecumenical council, especially. So anyway, everybody's given this schema, and it says, all the bishops of the world now, today we are going to get into our committees, and we're going to discuss the Blessed Virgin Mary in some aspect of her, or whatever. I mean, it's making it a little bit too simplified. But anyway, the schema that he came up with for Vatican II was, in fact, exceedingly orthodox, and Vatican II would have been a magnificent council if they had only followed the schema. That archbishop's name was Marcel Lefebvre, and on the very first day, the liberals took over the council and scrapped his schema. And they had one written of their own, which had nothing to do with dogma or doctrine or anything. It was, as I put it, it's like bishops smoking marijuana had come up with statements. And so it was all about, this subject and that subject, the church in the modern world, how do we update the church and all this kind of stuff, that an ecumenical council has no business really addressing. That's not the purpose. But the main point I want to get across to you all is that Vatican II, it was a disaster, but it was not a dogmatic council. There was not one doctrine defined at Vatican II. The first one in the history of the church, the first ecumenical council, when there was not one single doctrine defined. The only doctrines you have to believe in from Vatican II are the ones they quoted from previous councils. And there are some people who try to argue with that. I've heard various priests and so-called scholars, modern scholars, saying, oh, it was, you have to believe Vatican II, and all this kind of stuff. Well, happily, we have Paul VI, who was the second pope of Vatican II. The Second Vatican Council was held in two sessions. 1962 to 1963, and then John the 23rd died. He's the one who called the council. They had to go through the whole business of electing a pope. The second part came in and ended in 1965, and that was under Paul VI. Okay? Well, so it was in two sessions, over in 1965. The Pope who did the second part of the council and was the one finally who was to sign all the documents was Pope Paul VI. And he said in a statement following Vatican II that it was never intended to be infallible. He said, we purposely did not invoke infallibility on the statements of Vatican II. So we have it from the horse's mouth, literally, here. And so I don't know where these so-called scholars could get away telling us we have to believe everything in Vatican II, because the Pope said we didn't, and he was the Pope who did Vatican II for the most part.
How did they systematically get rid of the Tridentine Mass and just say you have to go to Novus Ordo? And then the indult thing started, which makes no sense.
Oh, that's a long question.
That's a long story.
Well, what they did was, they called for some kind of reform of the liturgy,
Yeah, that was
you know,
under
and there was a conservative group within the bishops that were present at Vatican II, known as the International Fathers. And Archbishop Lefebvre was kind of one of their heads. Their inside head was Cardinal Enrico Dante, or Archbishop Enrico Dante. He wasn't a cardinal, I'm sorry. He had been the papal master of ceremonies for like 3 or 4 popes, very high up in the Vatican. And what he did was he said, okay, the liberals had called for liturgical reform, and he knew what they were going to try to do, because he had already seen the same group who gave us the 1955 Holy Week in action, Annibale Bonini and Cardinal Del Caro and these people, Antonini. He had seen where they were going with that. So he pushed for a reformed liturgy, so-called. And that was the first big break. That came out in 1965. And that is a missal which is neither fish nor fowl. Picture, if you will, the Mass we have here, more or less. But no prayers at the foot of the altar at the beginning. Most of what's in the middle in English, except for the Canon, which was supposed to be in Latin anyway, but wasn't always. And then no prayers afterwards, Leonine prayers or anything, or no last gospel, none of that stuff. So the 65, what his hope was to say, otherwise it was recognizable as the traditional Mass. So it's still, I mean, something like somebody who had been really beat up, but you can still say, yeah, that's them, you know. And he wanted to say, okay, you got your liturgical reform, let's move on with other things now. Hoping they would leave it at that, but they didn't leave it at that. So their committee kept on going, and actually, they had a committee, 6 of whom were Protestant ministers, write a liturgy. And Paul VI's instructions were, he wanted a liturgy that could be used by Protestants, namely Calvinists. Well, ecumenical in bad sense, right? And what he got was that. I had a cousin, she's converted to the Catholic faith now, but she was brought up Lutheran, and one day we drove by the Lutheran church that she used to attend, and, just wanted to feel the real absence, so I went in there. And on the table was, guess what? The Roman Missal of Paul VI. The Lutherans used that very book that is being used in the Novus Ordo parishes. Why? Because it doesn't contain anything specifically Catholic that wouldn't put off the Protestants. But anyway, they were working on that, and that came out in 1969. Now, when it came out in 1969, Pope Paul VI actually never properly promulgated it. He only gave the appearance of promulgating it. Promulgating means basically you have to use this book. This is the new book for the church. But what he said, if you read the document, is, so we've come up with this new order of Mass, and this book, this new Roman Missal, it's very nice, and we hope you use it, essentially. But what the modernists within the church did is give every impression that you had to use this thing now, and that the old Mass had been suppressed. There's not one document, not one hint of a document or statement from the church that says the old Mass was suppressed. Why? Because even the Pope knew you couldn't suppress it. It couldn't be suppressed. So they decided to give the impression, probably under Paul VI's direction, they decided to give the impression that it was suppressed. And how did they do that? They made sure that everyone in every parish was using the new missal that they give. And if anybody wanted to adhere to the old one, they made life very rough on them. As they continue really to do to this day. I mean, Probably most of those priests are dead, but I knew priests who just continued doing the traditional Mass, and they were thrown out in the streets. They had their insurance taken away. They had no means to support themselves. The bishop would just tell them, well, as of thus and such a date, I'm not supporting you anymore. You have no more insurance. And sometimes they sent them to mental institutions for treatment, and they injected them with all kinds of mind-bending drugs, and they came out. I don't know if fathers have seen this, but I saw priests that had gone through these programs, and they were vegetables after it, absolute vegetables. It was just like communism. So, in general, to answer your question, is the way they gave the impression that the old Mass had been suppressed was by communist tactics, by punishing people who said the old Mass, and giving free rein to anybody who would say the new one.
They came up with the idea of indult, like permission to go.
Right, and see, that's why we don't call it the indult, we call it the insult. Because there was such an overwhelming demand that they decided, well, to continue the lie that you need permission, we'll start issuing permission on a very restricted basis to do something we know you don't need anybody's permission for. Any priest who's ordained has the inherent right to offer the traditional Mass. It's the liturgy of the church, in spite of what they say to the contrary now about extraordinary and ordinary and all these kinds of rites. So you can't take that away from a priest to say Mass, and to say Mass according to the tradition of the church. But once again, they just made life rough on these people.
So what's the outlook for the true Church of Christ?
As far as I can tell, all our hope it comes in the promises of Fatima and the restoration of the church, the consecration of Russia to Our Lady's Immaculate Heart, and the restoration that will come after that. But after many chastisements that we're actually undergoing at the moment in various ways. But yeah, all this, the stuff that's going on now in the church is really a chastisement. Yeah. Look at how the Church of Christ is being afflicted by the statements of the modern church authorities.
Well, it's quite sad that, this person that I know from Nova Scotia, that, she kind of goes around like she's somebody in the church because she wears all these ripped clothes. It's like penance.
Ripped clothes for penance.
Yeah, just like, and then she goes around, she like goes in a mirror and she's like, well, why are you there? Like, and then she has nerve to say, she's so young. And she goes, well, those priests, and the way she said it, it was so arrogant, and I just couldn't believe. Like, that's like a norm. She's not just one person, that's like everybody,
Right.
So,
Yeah, see, all of a sudden we're the ones who are disobedient and schismatic. They've turned things on their heads. Think about it. I've had people refer to us as schismatic, and I say, well, let me get this down. The new definition of schismatic is someone who does what the church has always done, teaches what the church has always taught, and believes what the church has always believed. That's the new definition of schismatic. I said, I was taught that it meant the opposite of that. Someone who doesn't teach what the church has always taught. Somebody who teaches something that is not what the church always believed, and who does something the church has that is novelty, that the church has not always done. And I said, and you know what? The parish you go to doesn't do any of the things we do. They don't teach or practice the... I don't know him. He's just another typical bishop, He's certainly not outstanding for anything, as far as I can tell. He hasn't made any particular statements. He's just going along with the flow of the modern church, which is how you keep your job, basically.
So in essence, so Vatican II is where basically they started changing the Mass.
Yes.
So you can't, it's not infallible because you can't change the Mass because Christ instituted it.
Well, no, that's a totally different subject.
Oh, that's not.
You can't change the Mass basically because when it reached its final form and was canonized, It was canonized by Pope St. Pius V. And he said, you may not change this missal anymore. It is now in its perfectly developed state. It is in fact our bulwark against the heresies, and you would be anathema if you changed this missal.
And that was when?
1570.
He codified that mass, didn't he?
Huh?
He codified it.
Right, he codified the,
Council of Trent. It's so easy to understand. How could they do it? I mean, it was so written, so perfect.
well, first of all, they denied it was dogmatic, and then they said, since it's not, we can change it. But the language of it is clearly dogmatic.
Right.
So, but Norma Soto is a changed mass, but you can't change it because it was already in the ballot.
Right, it's a changed missal.
Missal.
The whole thing is changed. The core of the Mass,
Right.
the rites, everything in it.
So, but the missal is the mass.
The missal contains the Mass, yeah. But it
Well,
also
I mean,
contains
when
other
you-
things.
The consecrating and everything.
Right, yeah, that's in there.
But they changed, all of that is different. And that's from Vatican II
Right,
on down. All right.
that flows from Vatican II.
Right.
But another thing to remember about Vatican II is that a lot of the changes that happened afterwards weren't specifically mandated by the Council. They were the modernists who used Vatican II as the implement to institute their private things they wanted changed in the church. So they just went to different places and said, well, Vatican II says we have to do this. Vatican II says we have to do that. It's like the tabernacle. I mean, how many churches do you go into, modern churches, where you go in and you can genuflect because the tabernacle's right in the middle? You'll hardly see them. In fact, when I was home last, I went into one of the parishes we had gone to when I was growing up near my house, and there was no tabernacle even in the church. It wasn't even just off the side somewhere. So I found some guy, doing so, he was like the janitor. I said, where's the tabernacle? He goes, oh, I'll show you. So he brought me back in the old altar boys sacristy and opened a closet. And it was in the closet of the altar boys sacristy, with no vigilite, no nada. I mean, it looked like somebody was storing an old tabernacle in there or something or other. Anyway. But that's truly is a whole other day's work. All right, so we have the statement of Cardinal Gaspari. We talked about what an ecumenical council is. And it says it's a gathering of the bishops of the entire Catholic Church called together by the Roman Pontiff. It is still an ecumenical council even if every bishop in the church cannot attend, okay? I don't think 100%, except maybe, well, I don't know, maybe the very first ecumenical council. But I don't think there's ever been an ecumenical council of the church where 100% of all the bishops in the world could attend it. They're just problems. Somebody gets sick or whatever. But it's still considered an ecumenical council if the Pope is presiding over the bishops who could attend. The Roman Pontiff exercises a program. So ex cathedra, we are bound to believe Catholic tomorrow, so that, okay, we finished that. All right, so a divine church needs a divine guarantee. So is it a divine church? Of course it is, because it was established by a divine person who is Christ. The present age is one in which reason has been exalted beyond reason. We have already, well, of course, we don't in this age. We now have turned to exalting emotion above reason. So, but what he's talking about then is the people who say, for example, the modern rationalists, miracles cannot happen. Armed with that self-made dogma, he continues to assert that Christ never worked miracles and that therefore he cannot be proved to be God. No matter how strong the historical evidence that miracles have actually happened and are continually happening even today, the disciple of reason sticks to his principle, miracles cannot happen, therefore they do not happen. I want to interject in there that, yeah, what he said is that reason has been exalted beyond reason, that isn't really good reasoning. Really good reasoning would lead you to the conclusion that Christ did work miracles, and then the conclusions that came from that. Rationalism isn't based on, it's not reducing faith to pure reason. It's reducing things to a kind of scientific, measurable provability in our modern age, if you understand what I mean. And what I mean by that, if you didn't, then I wouldn't blame you, is that a rationalist will look at things like the miracles of the Bible, and they'll say, well, I wasn't there. That was written by somebody. That couldn't have been written by anybody. That could have been made up. So I'm not going to believe that, because I am so rational that I only believe what I see for myself. Okay? But that isn't even good reason. Most of what we know, most of what we believe and know because it was told to us by somebody else. And that's the pure fact of it. There comes a point where sources have to be considered either reliable or unreliable. And in the case of biblical sources, we have it from the very history of the church, from the beginning, that the sources were considered reliable. In fact, that was one of the criteria that established what was going into the Bible in the first place. When the Catholic Church was given an opportunity to exercise its infallibility given to it by Christ, in the area of Scripture, it had some criteria for that. You realize it's the Catholic Church who put together the Bible. There was no Bible before the Catholic Church decided what books would go into the Bible and which books wouldn't. And it did that by applying infallibility. But it also used reason. And one of the things was that in order for a book to be considered part of the Bible that they were putting together, the Word of God, that it had to have been always in use in the church since it was written. It had to have been verified to be written by the person that said they wrote it. And there had to have been no objections to what was written in it by any contemporary. There were just a few of their criteria. So, for example, the Gospel according to St. Matthew, the very first Gospel to be written. When it was written, that was sent to people in the early church. It was copied by hand and sent to everywhere, basically, that the church was. And it contains, for example, that statement on the Confession of St. Peter, "Thou art Peter the rock." All right. So the church had to establish, and it did this in the 4th century. You realize there was no Bible until the 4th century, but it had to establish that there was this book called the Gospel of St. Matthew. They had to establish that it was written by the Matthew, the apostle who wrote it, whose name is on it. And it had been in use from the beginning in the church. It had been read in all the churches from the time it came out. And that nobody had ever looked at it and say, well, you know, one of the apostles started writing a little note, well, I was there and Christ never said anything like that. See, that never happened with these things. But it fulfilled all of those requirements, and therefore the church declared that the Gospel according to St. Matthew was, in fact, the Word of God, and to be included in this new collection they were putting together, which they so creatively called the book, or Biblios, or in Greek, or Bible in English. Okay? So, okay, so we have now reason being exalted beyond reason, which is their own form of reason, really. Miracles cannot happen, therefore they do not happen. Well, who says they cannot happen? In fact, we have a large, overwhelming amount of evidence that says miracles can happen, in fact, do happen, and are still happening. Go to Lourdes sometime and check out what's going on there. There are thousands upon thousands of documented, real, can't be anything but genuine miracles that are still happening there.
Well, today on EWTN Lunar Grace, there was a man on there explaining that in Lourdes, very few people are healed. But they have a doctor there that checks the few that it happens to.
Right.
Right.
Very few are, but some are and are checked out by a doctor.
Yes, yeah. They have he said Catholic Church is very careful about miracles, and they have a doctor there, and very few are actually. He intimated that very few are actually cured or.
Well, but that might be the case, but a very few percentage-wise.
Yeah.
I'm sure of 1,000 people that go there, maybe 10.
Yeah.
But that's still only, 1%, huh?
He used to throw stones,
Yeah.
at the belief, and of course it's Marian, and they don't like that.
Yeah.
So,
But so the whole assumption here is that miracles cannot happen, therefore they do not happen, is completely unreasonable and illogical. Yet human reason is so limited that without assistance it cannot even know what is in the mind of another. It cannot know what happens or has happened in some distant place or remote time. To find out these things, one has to be told by another, by someone who knows, otherwise he must remain ignorant. There are many things on which a man just cannot remain ignorant. For example, the law of the land. It is his duty to inform himself about the law, and if he does not do so, he will be punished. We've heard many times ignorance of the law is no excuse. So if some guy's going 80 in a school zone, he can't go into court and argue saying, well, I didn't know what the speed limit was, because you were supposed to know what the speed limit was, okay? So ignorance of the law is no excuse. Otherwise, the people would just keep themselves ignorant, so they'd have excuses all the time. That would be very handy.
They do that about the faith, though, don't
They
they?
do it about the faith, which is, kind of where that goes. There are many things on which a man just cannot remain ignorant, for example, the law of the land. Yet there are many far more vital matters about which men ought not to be in ignorance. Consider, for instance, the following questions. What is the purpose of our existence? Why did God make man? What is the nature of the afterlife? It is obviously essential that men know the answers to these questions. Otherwise, they simply cannot shape and orient their lives based on man's final end and destiny. What was in the mind of God when he made man? We cannot know this unless God himself tells us. We cannot even know exactly what is in the mind of another man unless that other man tells us. What is the nature of the next world? We cannot know unless God himself tells us. We cannot even know exactly what kind of place Australia is unless we have been there or unless someone who has been there has told us. So we stand in need of revelation, or something told to us by God about the object and end of our lives. Otherwise, our existence is ultimately aimless and for no known purpose. We have shown already in the instruction on the divinity of Christ that God has in fact made a revelation to us, that he has given us a great mass of teaching on many vital questions. So, for all of those questions, what was in the mind of God when he made man? What is the nature of the next world? God has told us the answers to those questions. And we need to find out what those answers are. We have shown, too, how in order that man might possess his teaching until the end of time, Christ founded a church. That church is God's own representative, his sole channel of communication with men, apart from special private revelations. We now assert that God prevents this church from giving men wrong teaching. He wants them to have certainty about the vital things that he has revealed. I think I'm going to end there. Okay, just remember we're stopping on 173 right before that list. Remember that tomorrow is a holy day of obligation. Meaning it's just like a Sunday, you must go to Mass.
Monsignor, and tomorrow is St. Pius V.
Oh, and it's the feast of St. Pius V. Happily. The great Pope who became Pope after the Council of Trent, but as Cardinal Michele Ghislieri was a shaker and a mover at the Council of Trent. Council of Trent ended in 1565. So, right? Any questiones? Okay. Name of the Father and Son and the Holy Ghost. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Our Lady, seat of wisdom. Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen.